Hi, this is Marcy Casterline, and this is more movie therapy. And this is a movie experience that really helped me understand my husband. It's not the movie that really gave me the idea for movie therapy, which was Phantom of the Opera and My Mother. But as you'll see, I'll explain this to you, and it's interesting. It gives you an idea of how movies can help you understand the people around you and that otherwise it will seem a mystery to you. All right, so this is the podcast on one of my husband's two emotional narratives, and this is the hero one, and this is the movie The Razor's Edge. It's I call it the misunderstood hero, and this is how my husband saw himself and how he justified his playing around through this kind of story, and I'm pretty sure of that, and you'll see why. I'm not going to look into the Bill Murray version, which bombed at the box office. It doesn't seem to me that this was a good Bill Murray role, although I'm a big Bill Murray fan. So this video is about the 1946 Tyrone Power version of the Somerset Maugham novel, and it's directed by Edmund Goulding. And this is more of what I call movie therapy. This movie was one of the first movies where I began to find answers to my questions about who my husband had really been by watching a movie. I was married to a man I loved and adored for 35 years. I now know for sure that he lied to me every single day of our relationship about the most important thing between married couples, his fidelity and his plan to leave me. He almost ruined my life, and he ended up committing slow-motion suicide for about 15 years by smoking himself to death. It was horrible to live through, and equally horrible never to know why he was so fatally depressed. In my book, Bedeviled, I tell the story of how I found out about Tom's problems and begin to understand who he was. Nevertheless, it was still very hard to make sense out of his day-to-day behavior. What story had he been telling himself that justified his deceptive behavior to his wife, to me, every day? This is where movie therapy really helped me. I hope it can help you. Not necessarily this movie, but you get the idea. If you watch a movie and the story bears some resemblance to what's happening in your life, it gives you an insight into the mind of that person. Movie therapy helped me to decode my husband's strange, conflicting actions and come to terms with who he really was. It's taken me a long time to understand how and why the man I loved and lived with could lie to me so blatantly and with such a seemingly clear conscience. How does anyone do that? Watching the movie Razor's Edge showed me Tom's inner monologue and what role I had played in that story in his mind. My first clue that the Razor's Edge was something very important to Tom happened when he was still alive, and we'd been watching the classic Tyrone Power Razor's Edge on TV. I was completely exasperated with the movie, and I said so. The hero's ideas and actions were completely self-serving and seemed kind of childish. Tom was quite offended. He told me he really liked the movie, and he looked really hurt and kind of quite offended by my remarks. It was clear to me that he shared the opinion of the author-narrator that Tyrone Power's character proves that goodness is the greatest force in the world. Really? Is it a force for goodness to love a woman who loves you but never marry her? To never take on the responsibility of doing something useful with your talents and intelligence? I didn't get it. At the time, Tom's overreaction seemed odd and sort of revealing, but I really couldn't see why this particular story would mean so much to him. Of course, since he lied to me every day of his life, I didn't actually have all the facts. Then one time when we were discussing actors, he said he thought Tyrone Power was the actor he'd most like to be like. Again, really? You, Tom, the fun-loving, earthy, genial, unpretentious person, want to be like angry, arrogant Tyrone Power? After his death and stunning revelations about who he really was, I had been completely baffled about what could possibly have been going on in his mind as he lived a double life that I now knew about. For more details about his revelations, read my book, Bedeviled. It's on Amazon, and it's authored by Marcy O'Rourke, because my husband's name was O'Rourke. I use Casterline now because that was my professional name, but the book Bedeviled is written under the name O'Rourke. Anyway, suffice to say, I had adored him. He was quite successful and well-liked, but he never seemed to get anywhere. Otherwise, we were pretty happy, I thought, except for his depressions. So one day, out of curiosity, after he'd been gone for several years, I happened to watch The Razor's Edge again, and the proverbial light bulb began to flicker in my mind. Here was the lovely Jean Tierney, supposedly a fairly well-off society girl, in love with Tyrone Power, one of her set and not poverty-stricken either, who wanted to marry her. But he also wanted to loaf while he looked for answers. She wants him to get a job so that they can have kids and pursue a normal, productive life. He takes a year in Paris, loafing, and he still doesn't have answers. But he tells himself that he's a superior person because he's asking important questions that no one else asks. Yeah, right. He's the first person ever to wonder about the meaning of life. But okay, we all have to do that at some point. But what a good excuse to never commit to the woman who you love, who loves you. It was starting to sound a little familiar. Okay, the Tyrone Power character says he loves Jean Tierney, but he wants her to live on his $3,000 a year annuity while they just drift around looking for answers and being superior to normal people. She says she'd be glad to live on $3,000 a year if he was earning it and had plans to do something and be going somewhere. She wanted him to have some ambition, to make something of his life. But he refuses to even consider that. He wants more answers and ends up, you guessed it, going to India, consulting some kind of guru who sends him up to a mountaintop alone to think. Finally, he sees the dawn and realizes it's beautiful, comes down from the mountain, but still doesn't want to get a job. Tierney gives up on him and marries a regular guy who has some money, a good job, and they have kids. The implication is she married the guy for his money, and she does admit she doesn't love him like she loves Larry, the Tyrone Power character. But loving Larry is the road to nowhere. She says she would never hurt her husband, and she is true to that. But it's when Tyrone Power and Tierney meet again in Paris and encounter an old female friend of theirs who has had a terribly tragic life and become an alcoholic call girl. This is where Tyrone Power's character goes noble. He tries to sober up this poor woman and promises to marry her. Nothing wrong with trying to help her, as both Tierney and her husband also tried to do before this woman left Chicago for Paris. But marry her? Why? Just because he's got nothing better to do with his life at the moment? He still claims to love Tierney. He really is just too good, too kind, and too noble. You'll notice goodness isn't having a job, being married, and raising kids in a community. No, goodness is swanning around the globe, seeking answers by pretending to be a poor working stiff when you don't even need the money. You're just doing it to find answers. And in an odd way, that was Tom. As I looked back at our life, he threw away everything he ever earned willingly and happily. He threw away his life with the same careless abandon. But my husband deeply admired and identified with the Tyrone Power character and that rationale of his life. That story was very close to his own idea of why he did what he did in life. He saw himself as the same kind of tortured, misunderstood hero as the Larry Durrell character in the movie. It's a very comforting narrative to explain away Tom's strange and constantly self-defeating behaviors. That's how wrong you can get your story. This movie did provide some insight into how Tom blithely told me he loved me, even as he fooled around every chance he got, and also why he had a secret plan to leave me. It was how he dismissed and backed away from every good thing that happened to him. He was searching for something. Like Tyrone Power, who doesn't marry because he doesn't want to be tied down, I think Tom secretly resented that he had to marry me to keep me beside him. He told himself that the reason he acted like this was that he was different and deeper than the rest of us. But the biggest tragedy of all is that I think Tom always knew there was something deeply wrong or different about him. And he was searching for answers to who he was and why he was different, just like the Tyrone Power character. Why couldn't he settle down and be happy like everyone else? What was different about Tom? I think I know the answer. He really couldn't feel anything. No joy, no happiness, no satisfaction, no love. Nothing in life could fill the empty void inside him. He was the emotionally and physically abused child of a teenage mother and a violent father. He couldn't feel important emotions like trust, belief in himself, admiration from others, and love. I believe his childhood abuse had made it impossible for him to feel anything. The normal joys of life were completely inaccessible to him due to his lifetime of ironclad control and repression of all his feelings. That is what was different about him. That is what he was searching for. But what he was looking for had been lost in his childhood. I confess this movie made me very angry at Tom and very sad. It was angry at his absurd excuses for all his wayward behavior, and sad. I mean, how could such an intelligent man behave so stupidly? He searched for answers everywhere but in himself. As in a fairy tale, there was one door that he never dared to open, the door to understanding his sexual obsession. He sacrificed everything that was good about himself, including his life, rather than face up to his sexual fixation. Tragic story, but at least I had some insights into how he saw our marriage. My movie therapy idea is to give you some hints on how to use movie therapy to understand your truth and your narrative. Maybe you recognize your significant other's story like I did and can help them understand better, themselves better, or help them better. Tom's real story, the tragic emotional truth of what was underneath all this posturing as a noble person searching for answers, is revealed in another Tyrone Power movie called Nightmare Alley, directed incidentally by the same director. I will cover Nightmare Alley in the next podcast. Movie therapy. Maybe you will recognize your parents' stories like I did when I watched Phantom of the Opera with my mother, and you'll be able to understand and forgive them and break the chains of pain, ignorance, and emotional wounds that have been passed down generation after generation. Parents often inflict so much emotional confusion on their children, even though they usually love as much as they can. They love those kids as much as they can, as much as they are able to. You too may watch some movie or play and find a deep connection with those who have come before and face the same trials and setbacks that you have. You may see your own story unfolding right in front of you and learn something. Anyway, thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate it. I hope I've helped you.